welcome. This is session 11. Just think, if you hadn't been watching me, you'd have had an extra 11 hours of which to probably watch Netflix or whatever else you do. But hopefully you have learned something and you have hopefully been entertained a little bit as well. If anybody is joining us for the first time today, hello. You're welcome. Nothing we're going to do today really requires you to have seen any of the previous stuff, so that's fine. Come in, make yourself at home, and over the next hour, hopefully, I'll teach you a little bit about some of the martial arts stuff that we're doing. Now, I'm afraid the focus on the camera is changing a little bit, as I don't know if you can see, it is slightly raining here, and it's predicted to get worse. So I'm expected to be absolutely drenched by the end of this video, so you're just going to have to bear with the lighting conditions a little bit, I'm sorry. But hopefully it won't be too much of a problem, and you get the added bonus of seeing me in additional distress, which normally entertains people. So, that brings us to today, and today we're going to be looking at Cunningham. Now, Cunningham is a very different style of cane to the one we've looked at previously. As I said, that's why you don't need to have seen the previous one to make sense of this. I will refer to Vigna cane. You're always welcome to go back and look at it, but you don't need to have known it. So it's very different, but we are going to be looking at cane today. Now, one of the things that makes Cunningham cane very different is it is designed to be used by somebody. In fact, it was created by somebody who used a walking stick, and it is designed to be used by people who actually need it as a walking aid. Now, when I say that, it is expected that you can stand unaided. In the original Cunningham treatise, that you can swing a cane around without moving your feet quite happily. But that's about as much mobility as you need. I'm also going to show you, when we come right towards the end, an slight alternate way of using it that allows you to actually be much more leaning on the cane and using it as a kind of tripod structure to keep your balance. But we'll come to that later. But what I'm saying is, you don't need any great physical aptitude for this. Unlike Vigna, where you might be kind of in these weird extended positions, there's none of that kind of stuff happening today. Much more sedate, but even still, if you're going to just pick up a cane and swirl it around, just take care. Be aware partly of what's around you. I'm outside today, not in my living room, so that I don't break everything when I'm swinging a cane around. So also, you know your limits, you know how much you can stand up if you do have walking problems, you know your physical abilities, you know how good your dexterity is when you're swinging a cane around and don't want to hit yourself in the head. Go at your own pace, set yourself your own targets, and stay safe. That's the main thing, okay? So, with that said, we shall fall in because that's how we start all of our classes. So, if we are ready, we start from attention, and we fall in. Right, so, as I said, Cunningham is where we are starting today. So, as with all things, we've got to look at what the weapon is. Now, Cunningham advocates a straight cane, if possible. Okay, so that's why I have my straight cane out with me here today. Partly because it's then very easy to thrust with both ends. If I have a hooked cane, something more like this, obviously I can thrust with this end quite happily, but any thrust with this end, that weight and that pressure is being distributed over a larger area, and that's more likely it's likely to do less damage, which is not what I want. So he advocates a straight cane. He also, mind you, in all of his photographs in his book, uses a curved cane. So draw your own conclusions. But he very much suggests something light, flexible, but with enough weight in it you can put a bit of heft in it. This one's deceptive because it's actually got a metal core in it, so it's actually a lot heavier than it looks. But something with a bit of weight, but not so heavy that you can't move it quickly. So, he also says we're going to use two grips when we're looking at Cunningham's work. The first of them is what I'm going to call a hammer grip. Now, with the hammer grip, I'm literally just going to wrap my hand around and my thumb over the top. It's like I would do if I was going to punch, or if I was indeed banging away with a hammer. Yeah, so the cane ends up 90 degrees from my forearm, and we're going to use this whenever we do a cut. Whenever we do something that's going to cut we're going to be using our hammer grip. The other type of grip he advises is what I'm going to call the Saber Grip. And for that, you're putting your thumb along the back of the cane. So you hold it in your fingers as you would, but your thumb rests along the back of the cane. Okay? The thing is, if you push with your thumb, you find that the cane ends up a straight extension of the arm. So rather than hammer grip here, I put my thumb on the back and push, and it's much more pointed forward. So we're going to use this thumb on the back Saber Grip whenever we're doing thrusting techniques. Okay? So it's important we know what they are and be able to switch between them. Okay? That is not a lot of movement and not something I would expect to cause anybody any problems. But it's important we know our grips. The next thing we need to be aware of is your stance, how you stand. Okay? Now, there are 3 stances that are used in Cunningham. And they very much depend on the circumstances you are fighting. So, if you are fighting against an unarmed opponent, the advice is that you stand with your left side. Now, I'm saying left side here. I shall say offside. That is a better option. Okay? I am right-handed, so I have my offside forward. Okay? If you were left-handed, that would obviously be your right-hand side. And also, I'm aware that all of this is mirrored due to the wonders of camera technology. So, who knows which sides it actually looks like I'm waving at. But I have my offside forward, okay? And much like a lot of martial arts, I've got one foot pointing, my lead foot pointing directly at my opponent, my other one slightly out to the side, turned at an angle. So I don't really have to bend my knees, but I've got that mobility in my legs, and I've got that stability and structure. Okay? My left hand comes up and covers over my chest, almost with my elbow pointing towards my opponent, out here. And the cane is held down and out to one side. So it's all the way down here, which seems a very odd compared to our Vignay stance we were looking at up here. This is where we start for Cunningham. Okay? So side on, my foot forward, my other one gives me a little bit of space, this hand across my chest, cane down and out to one side. Okay? And that is going to be our left stance, which is what he calls it, but it's really our offhand stance, which we're going to use if somebody is unarmed. The reason for that is we don't want them to grab the cane, so we're going to keep that well out of the way, and we're quite happy to block, move things out the way with this lead hand, and use that more as a finishing technique when we need it. Okay? So for those of you who have studied improvised weapons with me over the years, it's much more like kosh or baton in that sense. I want to keep it out of the way, because the minute this gets grabbed, we're both holding it. So if it's back out the way, it can't get grabbed, I can deal with punches or even strike back myself with my lead hand, and then when the opportunity presents itself, deliver the cut with the cane. Okay, now obviously we might encounter a situation where our opponent is armed, and in that case we adopt the left stance, or the on stance. So this time the footwork is exactly reversed. So now I have my hand out in front of me. This hand, my offhand, stays across my chest in pretty much the same position. And in fact the cane stays, but it's now extended forward a little. So it's now occupying a gap between me and my opponent. Okay, and that's the defense we're going to use if they have, for example, a knife or a cane or whatever, because it extends the distance that we can reach with the cane. Compared to here, I can get that kind of far, whereas if I'm on the other stance, I can get right the way off the screen there. Okay, so it puts me closer to the action with the cane, and it also means I'm going to be doing most of my defending with the cane and attacking, rather than risking my hand on a knife edge or against a bottle or whatever. He does make mention to using this against guns. I think that's a really stupid idea. If somebody knows what they're doing with a gun, they will not be in cane range for you to deal with. But certainly knives, broken bottles, any other kind of improvised or assorted small weapons. Cane forward, hand up, that's your guard there. The third situation he talks about is when you're facing multiple opponents. Now, if you are... Now this is something that goes back to one of my childhood things. I'm going to go off on a slight ramble here I never planned on. I I love Kung Fu movies, and I've probably mentioned this before. One of my great heroes is Jackie Chan. Just because he was some of the first martial arts movies I saw, and he really just blew me away with some of the stuff he was doing. What I've realised over the years is that the main thing he brought was the idea that people don't line up and attack you one at a time. If you watch, and I hate to say this, some of the Bruce Lee stuff, some of the other Kung Fu stuff, and even martial arts stuff around at the time, a lot of the bad guys mill around in the background waiting for their chance to step in and attack. When you watch Jackie Chan, they all attack at once, okay? And he's weaving and dodging around them. And that's what you've actually got to prepare for in a real fight. I can't go, here is my opponent. Don't worry about his 3 friends behind me. I know they won't do anything until I finish dealing with the guy in front of me. Absolutely not. Whilst I'm doing this, I'm getting hit in the back of the head by 3 guys. So, you've got to be able to move around you, be aware of behind and to the sides, and be able to strike in those distances. So if I'm here, in my right stance, I've got a great arc in front of me, and indeed not too bad to both sides, but behind me is a real struggle. Meanwhile, if I'm left side forward, my right hand side, my forward and my backwards are all good, but I've got very little towards my left hand side. So in order to get round this, when facing multiple opponents, the two-handed guard was normally used. Now for that one, you assume your right hand position, but the cane is held in both hands, thumbs pointing in towards the middle, up at about chest height. For those of you who know anything about stick fighting, this is what we would call Doyle's family shillelagh guard, which we'll be talking a lot about next week. But for now, it is the multiple person guard. And the reason for that is I have access to this full range of movement here, and this here, and this behind me, this in front of me. And I have that full range of attacks available to me from this guard. And I'm not at any point unable to strike, so my opponents can't use my blind spot as a weakness to get in at me. Okay, so stance 1, left hand for unarmed, 2, armed right stance, and multiple opponents, double hand stance. Okay, wow, that's quite a lot to take in already, and we still haven't looked at any attacks. Now, there are quite a few that he talks about. The first one he talks about in attacks is the jabs. What I should say is what I'm doing here at the beginning is I'm going through each of the techniques. I'm teaching you the language of Cunningham, as it were. What I'm going to do in the second half is show you how to apply that in an actual fight situation. So, the first thing Cunningham talks about is jabs. Now, jabs, when Cunningham's talking about them, are delivered with the butt of the cane. So the idea is, these tend to be used at short range, and they're used with a hammer grip. I know they're technically a thrust, but they're not used with the Saber Grip. They're used with a hammer grip. So I will bring the cane up and smash it forward into my opponent's face. And I can do that quite happily up here. I can do that up here. I can do it across the body and up this way. The only one that's really awkward is this one here, which I wouldn't do. I'd probably pull it back and use a solid poke instead. But certainly for those 3 angles, either side of the head and right the way across the body, you've got these jabs, okay? Now, if you're coming in from low, you're aiming for the stomach, sternum. Potentially you could up under the chin. If you're coming from this side, if you're coming from either side of the head, you're looking to smash that into the face, the side of the head, you know, the same kind of place we would normally look at, the temple, behind the jaw, the nose, even down into, there's a lovely kind of gap in your bone structure at the top of your rib cage between your scapula and your clavicle, which again, if you can just get that down there and just drive it down, that will cause a lot of pain. Okay, so stomach, chest, head. We have jabs that we can work with. Now moving slightly further away, we also have thrusts, okay? And this is where we're going to switch to our Saber guard. So from here, I can thrust. And again, I can do that on any line that I find useful to do. I can thrust that cane out. And all of them that cane is driving into my opponent. Rather than fencing, where I might lunge, all I'm doing here is leaning my weight into it a little bit so that I've got a very quick recovery. And again, if I actually need this to walk around, it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to, you know, do these kind of wild lunges. I want to just lean into it a bit and pull back. But that lean in, with the small surface area hitting, is going to do your damage. And again, depending on where your opponent is going to determine which line you want to take. But the attacks are exactly the same kind of places. You want to hit stomach, sternum, throat, nose, forehead, side of the head if they offer it to you. So those are using either end of the cane. Okay, you have your thrusts, you have your jabs. And then we have your cuts. Now there are lots of different cuts, but all of them can be delivered with 3 levels of intent. Essentially, there's always a trade-off between speed and power. And Cunningham accepts that as 3 separate intensities. So the first one is, and I'm trying to get his wording for it because I always use the wrong one, a snap cut. Now a snap cut is delivered entirely with the wrist. So from here, an example of a snap cut would be my wrist and a strike there. Yeah, that would be down into my opponent's kneecap. My elbow isn't moving, my shoulder isn't moving much. It's all really coming from the wrist. That's a snap cut. Now, the next one is a half-arm cut, which means we move up a joint. And this time I can move my elbow. So that same cut, rather than being there, as a half-arm cut, becomes there. So that's my snap cut. That's my half-arm cut. I've then got a full-arm cut, and I can use my whole arm. So rather than a half-arm cut, I go to a full-arm cut. So snap, half, full. Snap, quick, not a lot of power in it. Half-arm, kind of the halfway house between the two, and then a full-arm is slow, but there's a lot of power in it. Okay? You can deliver any of the cuts with the different levels of intensity. Okay? So just that cut I was looking at there, you can see that I can do it. But equally, I can deliver a cut from here with just my wrist, with my half arm, or with my full arm. I can deliver that cut. So I have those choices no matter how I'm attacking. Okay? And again, that determines on the situation. Do you need to hit him quickly to stop him doing something, or do I need to just incapacitate them, and do I have the time to get those heavy hits in? Okay, so let's actually look at the cuts. There are essentially, how many do I want to say? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cuts that we're going to use with what I'm going to call the true edge. If I'm using my Saber Grip, I have a situation where my knuckles are all lined up on the other side from where my thumb is. Okay, imagine a line drawn up my cane there, and we're going to call that the true edge, okay? If I was holding a sword, that would be the sharp bit I want to hit my opponent with, okay? And we have 5 cuts that are delivered with what we call that true edge, okay? That's going to feel natural to you, because if you picked up anything sword-like or a stick and pretended it was a sword, you probably cut with that imaginary edge. Okay, so they're really easy cuts to do. And unsurprisingly, they start with one straight down on the top of the head. You've got diagonals in at either side of the neck, and then you've got horizontals, again, side of the head into the neck. Straight down, diagonals, straight across. Okay, there's no real subtlety with those. Much like any other kind of cane work and things, he suggests that you don't overswing unless you're sure of a hit. Okay, so if I do this cut here, it will stop pointing at my opponent or slightly off to one side. I don't end up here, where I'm open, and if I've missed, I'm dead. Here, and I've missed, I can bring it back into block. I've still got a thrust. Okay, that was totally the wrong block for Cunningham. I apologise. But I've still got that option. So what I want to do is practice my cuts coming to the middle of the body. Even when I'm doing a big cut, I don't really want it to drift too far away. But realistically, those are likely to be the kind of cuts I use most of the time. we have those 5 cuts we can use, and the other 2 cuts we can use are with what we would call the back of the blade. So if you imagine we're going to hit, if you imagine a line going from your thumb up the opposite side from what we've just called the true edge, and we're going to hit with the back of that blade, okay? If anybody's actually done any saber, backsword, any kind of sword like that, you'll be used to this idea of having the back of the blade. And we can attack with it quite happily, or if we'd use it in side sword as well, and rapier and things like that as well. So what we'll be looking at here is to drag the sword up and flick it. Drag it up and flick it along that line. So what I'm actually hitting with is the back of that blade, rather than the front. So the front, I would have to turn my hand over to get my knuckles going in that direction. This is my knuckles are facing in the opposite direction, and I just scoop it straight up. And there's one of those on either side for my upwards diagonals. Okay? So down is true edge, diagonals are true edge, sideways is true edge, diagonal upwards are false edge. So I'm dragging it through my opponent. They're really important in this system. Because the cane starts down here, a lot of the time your first movement is going to be one of those upward flicks, and it normally feeds into a downward flick. So I need to get pretty good at those flicks, and the way to do them is you almost kind of push your hand up first. So the point stays where it is almost, and you push your hand up, and then pull your wrist towards you as you move your hand up to get the maximum amount of speed at the end of the cane. So if I just move from here and just move my hand, you don't really hear that swooshy noise. If I push my wrist forward and then pull, I don't know if you can actually hear it, but I'm starting to get a bit more of a swish when I actually do that, which means it's moving a lot faster, obviously, because it's displacing more air. That's how sound works. We'll not go into a science lesson quite now. So those are my attacks. All I've really got to look at now are my parries. And in Cunningham, all of our parries are going to be what we would call, from other martial arts, a circle or a semicircle parry. So essentially we have these on a low line and a high line. Most of the time, not surprisingly, these are going to be on a low line, because our cane's going to start down here. And what I'm going to do is, keeping my wrist almost where it is I'm going to sweep a big circle back to where I started. And you'll notice that covers my legs, my body, my head are all covered in that sweep. And that is my block. To pretty much, for stabs coming in, move it out the way. If there's a cut coming into this side, batter it out the way. Cut coming in from that side, batter it out the way. Yeah? You can, of course, go the other way, which might be safer. If there's a cut coming in this way, you can batter the other way. But you've got your circles, either direction, should block anything coming at me. Okay? The other two that we need to look at, okay, two, because they go in different directions, is if for some reason my cane is high, probably after I've done a thrust or after I've done a cut, and my hand is up. And what I'm going to do here is I'm now going to go down and across. So I'm still completing a circle, but rather than here where it comes across and up, this one is going to go down and across. Now the reason I'm going to use that one, try and grab another cane and show you, is if I was to attack and the other person blocks, that cane is then coming in a direct line for me here. Okay? I can't really attempt to get my cane over and inside to move this. So what I have to do is drop it, swing it underneath, and take it back out to that side. So I'm trying to essentially do a counter disengage almost in terms of how I think of the hand motion. I'm sure many fencers will be screaming at me for getting that terminology wrong. But if I've attacked and the other person is coming to hit me, I need to have that down circle there. Yeah? There is technically going in the other direction, but we're unlikely to use it. Okay? Parry 1, parry 2, parry 3. And that's really all the parries that we're going to be using. Okay. Other than that, it comes down to timing and footwork, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about today because I'm trying to get through a whole system in an hour, and I've had like 25 minutes already. So, jabs, thrusts, true edge cuts, false edge cuts, 1 parry, 2 parry, 3 parry. Okay, hopefully that makes some amount of sense. In terms of, you can see that if somebody was going to attack you, you've got a parry. If you want to attack, you have a choice of options on how you hit somebody. Okay? Those are your, okay, other than footwork, which I said I've taken out, these are your techniques. Okay? And really, all of the rest of Cunningham is about how you chain these techniques together to make them actually effective. Okay? Because if I'm here, and I go, parry, and then don't do anything, I'm not being effective. I've stopped myself getting hit, but I haven't in any way stopped him just doing it again. And if I'm waiting for him to stop attacking so that I can attack back, you're never going to get anywhere. Okay? So Cunningham has ways that he deals with different attacks coming in. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit later on, after I've done my ramble. We'll be looking at how to actually make sense of this. But now what you have is the basic building blocks. So, as I said, I'm going to ramble for a bit because that's what I tend to do towards the middle of these, even if I did go off on a Kung Fu ramble earlier. I'm going to go off on a relevant ramble now, which makes it a totally different thing. So, if I was talking about Cunningham as a system, it makes sense at this point to give you an idea of who Cunningham was as a man. Okay, the name doesn't just come out of nowhere, it's named after a man. He is called Alistair Chase Cunningham. And for those people who like dates, I've written it down. He was born in 1858 and died in 1917, because people love those kind of things. So, what's the story with him? He was born just outside of New York, so he's an American. And really, the first time I really hear about him is he joins the Navy. Okay, so he finishes up with school, joins the Navy, and works his way up to the rank of ensign, working on the actual Navy ships. During this time, he realizes that he doesn't really want to be in the Navy, and what he really wants to be is a civil engineer. So he leaves the Navy, retrains as an engineer, goes and gets a degree. So as you can imagine, that's quite prestigious back then when degrees were very rare. He gets a degree in civil engineering. He then goes through a series of jobs with civil engineering. He starts off as what do I want to say? What's the word I'm looking for? I'm thinking conveyor, but it's not quite the right word. Brain blank. It's terrible. Topographer, that's the word I'm looking for. So he starts off as a photographer, becomes a draftsman, gets used to designing engineering machines, and eventually becomes an inspector of works. So he is the person who either goes to a plant and inspects that it's working properly, or inspects the goods coming out of a plant to see if they are any good. During this time, his particular expertise becomes in steel. He becomes really good, and he's one of the most knowledgeable people on steel as a commodity, which, as you can imagine, in the Industrial Revolution in America, is kind of a big, important commodity. Anyway, I'm not good at dates, 1898, the Spanish War breaks out. And suddenly America is going to war. And so the American government puts out a voluntary request for any retired servicemen to re-enlist. Cunningham is clearly a patriot. He takes this offer and he re-enlists in the Navy. He gets his old rank of ensign back and is sent out on a ship to carry on being a member of the Navy. However, he is headhunted by the Rear Admiral of the Fleet, which is a great title, because of his knowledge of steel. He hunts him out and he actually personally visits him whilst he's in dock, and basically says, "You are wasted as an ensign on a ship. We need to get you actually using this fantastic knowledge of steel you have and using it to our advantage." So he gets taken off and is put into the naval gunboat bases, where he spends the rest of the war, really, and the rest of his career designing ships, traveling with ships, and making sure that all of the gunnery and all of the techniques and stuff they're using are correct, and using the best of the properties they have to make better ships and use them effectively. He climbs up the ranks. I think he eventually gets to lieutenant commander in kind of round about the early 1900s, so towards the end of his career. And whilst on a trip, suffers a nervous breakdown. At that point, he takes kind of honourable discharge retirement on sick pay, and really spends the rest of his life either training people or writing. He's a great passion for writing, so he uses this period to write down a lot of his amassed knowledge. He was clearly an incredible civil engineer. He held something like about 5 or 6 patents in his own right and his own name. But he was also a very keen fencer throughout his entire life. Wherever he went, he would either set up fencing clubs, encourage kind of just casual fencing play with other people, and trained whenever he could. So much so, actually, that during the Spanish War, the American army approached him to ask for his advice on saber technique to actually use in conflict. So he was clearly well-renowned and well thought of for his fencing as well. He was also a big fan of single stick, which is a kind of sport version almost of saber or backsword, and also the walking stick. He was fascinated with the walking stick as a method of self-defense. So during this period, I think it was in 1912, he actually finally released his book, which is I'm trying to remember. I always remember what it's called. The Cane as a Weapon. I keep wanting to call it The Art of Self-Defense. I don't know why, but The Cane as a Weapon is his book, and it's published in 1912. And he sets out his system for how to use the cane, not as a giant weapon, but as something that could be used in civilian self-defense by someone who is vaguely sound of body. Okay? And he specifically uses this example of a walking stick, somebody needing to use it to walk with, being able to use this system. So that's what we know about Cunningham, is he left as well. He wrote a treatise on sabre as well that's really good, but particularly his book on cane is what brings us of interest to us. Now, obviously, this means that Cunningham has, as far as we know, zero connection to Bartitsu as a whole. As far as where he didn't train with anybody, anything like that. But clearly he was interested in some of the same things. And this idea of civilian self-defense with a weapon that was to hand, it makes it an interesting comparison to a system like Vignay. It's got some nice techniques in, and it is a very nice self-defense system. So I think it fits within our remit of antagonistics rather than strictly in our Bartitsu section. Anyway, that's enough of me talking about Cunningham, because I know everybody thinks I talk too much. So, let's have a look at how we would actually use Cunningham were we to encounter it in a fight. So, the first thing we're going to look at is the targets. We've already talked about where we'd use to attack each attack. Sorry, where we'd strike with each attack. But Cunningham says your first point should always be to try and hit your opponent's hand. Okay? If they're unarmed, this is their weapon. Break it, they can't keep hitting you. Okay? If they're carrying a knife, get the knife out of the hand. Break their hand and they can't hold the knife. Take the weapon away. Yeah? As I said, he says, even if it's a gun, you might be able to smash the gun out of their hand. Not going to suggest it as a good plan. But always go for the hand, if you can. And after the hand, go for the head. Okay? So that's your targets. Whenever somebody approaches you and you're going to use the cane, you want to break the hand and then you want to break the head. Really simple. Don't start trying to think about cunning attacks to other parts of the body unless it's useful or particularly circumstantial that you can do it. Mostly you want to break his hands, you want to break his head, and you can walk away safe. So, with that said, what happens... I'm just trying to check. Alright, yeah. Sorry. I'm trying to struggle to read my own notes. As I said, rain is making it somewhat more difficult to read than it would be normally. So yeah, we're going to break the hands, Then we're going to break the head by doing cuts, and then you're going to be using these thrusts that come out. They're going to happen much more to what he called the lower trunk, so the stomach area really. We don't hit the chest a lot in this. We hit the hands, we hit the head, and we thrust at the stomach. So if I am attacked by somebody who is unarmed, my basic stance is to go into my left-handed stance, and I am here. So somebody is now approaching me and trying to punch, and I essentially have my left hand to box with. Okay, so I can block as I would do in Bartitsu. I can kicking, I can scoop those out of the way. You know, I can palm down. Whatever I want to do, I have those kind of ways of dealing with punches. Yeah. I also still have a straight punch there. I've got a hook. It's sorry, an uppercut. It's not great. I've got a hook. I have access to those techniques with this hand, and I'm going to fight with this hand. And ideally, when they're punching, I want to parry those up. The more I can drive his hands and his attention up, the better, so that I can bring the cane up and then use a thrust into the stomach. So if I can knock the hand up and then thrust into the stomach, basically repeatedly. So knock the hands up, thrust into the stomach. That's your first basic tactic there, sorry. Oh. So, yeah. Now, of course, once we've stabbed, block up, stab a few times, there's nothing to stop you taking swipes in at the head. But if they're in that boxing range, you're more going to be looking for opportunities to grab the hand, pull them offline, and deliver a good solid blow. So if you're just bouncing the attacks off, keep it with these nice short jabs, okay? If you're managing to actually grab them, pull them offline, and present a proper target, that's when your finishing blow comes in with a big strike. Now, obviously, I've said the lower trunk, so we're hitting the stomach with these thrusts. There are two other targets that I think are worth mentioning. One is a little bit lower than that. It never hurts to ram a piece of wood into your opponent's groin. Okay, it is a great way of leveling the playing field. They are going to be in a lot of pain and distracted by that. The other thing you can do is if you target just the inside of the hip. So when I hit here, my stance disappears, and especially if I'm walking forward at the time, I end up kind of stumbling over because suddenly the way my body likes to stand doesn't work anymore and I crumple. So one tactic is to block, find that with the cane and shove, let them stumble backwards and swing down at the back of the head as they're stumbling backwards. So block up, hip, back of the head. Okay? Nothing complicated. Otherwise, block up, stab. Block up, stab. Grab to one side, cane to the back of the head. Okay? So there is your how to tackle being attacked by someone who is unarmed. We could also have a situation where they close in and they grapple with us. Okay? Now, the first thing to do when somebody tries to grapple with you when you're using Cunningham is not to turn face on and go into a kind of collar and elbow grab. Instead, I want to turn slightly and let them grab my right hand side. Okay? Now, I've got a very weak kind of thrust I can do here. So instead, what I'm looking for either, if they're grabbing low, yeah, so they're kind of round my waist or my chest, and I'm kind of above that, unlikely for somebody my size, but might be for others, I'm going to raise the cane up and just use those jabs directly into the back of the head. Yeah? Or the shoulders, or the arms, until they give up. Okay? Option number 2 is if they are grappling a bit higher and I can't get my cane up to do that attack. These stabs here aren't very good. The one Cunningham suggests, I'm not a huge fan of, which is he says to pass the cane behind the back, grab it with the other hand, and jab into them this way. Now, it's a much stronger jab. Don't get me wrong. This kind of almost feels like, reminds me of playing pool when I was a student. But these, I find it a very awkward situation to be in to try and get that into my opponent's ribs. What I think might be a better plan is if they're grabbed high, is to get both hands around them low, take the cane, and you'll notice that I still have the butt of the cane here. So I can get both hands around and then just drive that butt of the cane into their spine, their kidneys, just really grind it. Could grind into their back. If you can find the kidneys, they will kind of pop up. Otherwise, you're just going to cause a lot of pain to them until they give you some kind of opening. Yeah, once they've got the opening, scoop the arms up, thrust into the body, step, straight to the back of the head. Okay? But those are the techniques that really come out. 3 techniques. If it's a low block, a low grapple, smash them on the head. You can try behind the body, or you can try the grab and grind technique if that is more your style. So, we've dealt with an unarmed boxer and an unarmed grappler. The next thing we have to worry about is what if we get somebody who is armed? Whether that's a knife or a cane, as I said, broken glass, whatever. Okay, so this time we're going to move round to having the right foot forwards. This is our right foot stance here. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes again to make sure I get this right. Cunningham is not a system that I commonly practice, so I just don't want to give false information when it's being recorded for prosperity. You know, you get in trouble with that kind of thing. So, the next one is my opponent is armed and I am here facing them. I now have my cane forward and in between us, okay? Partly that stops him closing too close because I have the cane in the way, he has to deal with that. So here's my stance. I'm standing, waiting for my opponent. When they come in with an attack, I'm going to use my parry to take that out of the way. So step 1, I parry, and then I step off. Okay? I don't want to stay on that same line. So after I've done this, I'm going to step offline. And ideally, I'm going to do that at the same time. Okay? So literally, as soon as my cane, the important thing is not to move your foot before you move the cane. So once the cane is past my foot, I can step, bring the back foot round. So I've moved kind of 45 degrees round, which is just a slightly better angle to re-attack my opponent. So once I've taken my parry and step off, I then want to just labour hits on them as quickly as I can. And there are 2 main ways of doing this. One is after I've done that step off, I can use a downwards X just to lash hit down on them and make them back off so that I have got them on the retreat. Okay? These are not designed to be finishing blows. This is just to keep the pressure on them, get them moving away. Okay? So, yep, and I'm just moving them back. If you don't like the downwards X, you can do what he calls sweeping cuts. So after I've done my step off, I'm just going to go backwards and forwards in front of me. Very similar kind of technique. So rather than this, which I prefer, you can... Both of them have that effect of just labouring blow after blow after blow, which means they've either got to soak that up or they've got to move. And what you're doing is as you deliver these, you're waiting for an opportunity when I can deliver a bigger hit. I'm waiting for them to go curl up in a ball, and then I can see the exposed part of the head. That's when my attack comes in. Okay, they're really covering their head well, great. That's when I'm going to find that low blow into the stomach and really do some damage. Okay? So, if they're armed, parry and step off, lots of blows, finish it off. Okay? That's the tactic. The idea is not to give them, not to fence with them. Don't, I block and I strike back. No. One chance, you missed it. And it's over. Okay? We're not going to let it go back and forwards. Okay? We don't have the time. We have the element of surprise. Okay? We might be slightly infirm on our legs. We're using a cane. They have a knife that can literally kill us. We don't give them multiple chances. They get one chance. And we're going to parry that and then we're going to kill them. Well, we're not going to kill them, but we're going to batter them a lot. Okay, so that is your basics of what do you do if somebody comes in. Now, obviously, it may not work particularly well, and you may end up having to rely on these other cuts. You may have to look at these other parries I've talked about, and then coming into these other cuts. All of that is with practice, okay? You cannot beat learning something other than sparring with it over and over again. But what I'm giving you is like the quick one tactic works. So if you can only remember 3 tactics, you can deal with an unarmed, a grappler, and an armed opponent now, okay? Yeah? So that's what we're looking for. Parry and step off. Lots of little blows. One big blow. Finish it off. Right. There are, however, some situations where Cunningham recommends some slightly different uses of this. And one of them we alluded to earlier, because we have our double-handed stance. Okay? And we have the situation now where we have multiple opponents. Okay? We're going to use our footwork in so much as we don't want them to gang up on us. We ideally want them in a narrow field in front of us where we can actually see exactly what they're doing and control them. We don't want them to flank us, because then if my attention's that way, I don't know what they're doing behind me. I've still got the freedom to turn and attack, but I don't know what they're doing. Whereas if I can then step back a bit so that I've got peripheral vision on both of them, I have a much better chance of anticipating what's coming in. Okay? From this stance, yeah, I still have my parries, but I can now do them with both hands. I've still got all of my strikes. I've still got my my jabs, but now my jabs come in with 2 hands, much more power behind them, almost like a bayonet thrust. And I've still got my thrusts if somebody's a bit further away. So I'm going to use my footwork to make sure I'm not flanked as much as possible. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack one of my opponents. I don't care whether it hits or lands. He's defending against that attack or he's getting hit. I am sourcing out where my next attack is going. Strike 1 goes there. It comes back again. My other opponent's over here. So that strike comes back there. My opponent's now behind me. Double-handed strike at them. Back to this opponent. Back to my guard so I can see what's going on. And I've got that defense there if I need it to move things out the way. So what I'm then doing is just attacking a different opponent with every attack. I don't focus on one person and try and grind them down and win. Yeah? Because what I want to do is make each of them go, oof! And then whilst they're recovering, I want to be hitting somebody else so that I'm then hitting back again as they would be taking an action to hit me. So that I keep them constantly kind of going, oof! No, oof! No! And they can't get in at me because I'm just striking from one person to the next person to the next person. You might have seen stances like this as well. It's not one I like, it gets too high, but it does give you that option to either side. I prefer the middle ground here where I can strike back and forth to either direction. Sorry, I've just ripped a blister in my hand, I've realised. Wait a minute, let me just take that off. Right. So that is the multiple persons, okay? That one is one of the things that are worth knowing about. Next one is if I have an umbrella rather than a cane. Now, this is nice and spongy. There's absolutely no point trying to do cuts with this. Okay, but I can still use this same tactic here, and that will certainly move things out of the way. Yeah? But what I'm going to rely on a lot more are my thrusts. Yeah, this point here, that's still perfectly effective. Even, I mean, it's not great, but I've still got my jabs in here as well, and my thrusts. And if I'm using the two-handed stance, those bayonet thrusts with an umbrella can be quite scary. Okay? So you can't cut with them, you can still parry with them, you can still thrust with them. So an umbrella is still a worthwhile weapon, and that's how Cunningham would recommend that you use them. What else have we got? Yes, Cunningham, of course, is a man who wanted to cover all eventualities. One of the other eventualities he covers is what if your opponent is a dog? I assume this is in a situation where we're talking guard dogs and things, but were you to come face to face with a dog, how would you approach that? Now, obviously, something like a Vignette stance up here is no good to a dog that's probably waist height, okay? Now, I'm not going to suggest you go around beating up dogs, but in a life or death situation, this is what you do, at least according to Cunningham. You face off against the dog, you keep the cane in the forward position between the two of you. Again, for that reason, dogs move a lot. They will circle back and forward because they're predatory animals. They'll do this kind of looking for an opening, yeah? So you're going to keep that in between so they don't have a straight line between their teeth and you, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to use that snap cut up to get their attention underneath the jaw, and then back down on the other side with just a snap cut. Because it's quick, and I'm back to my guarded position. Snap, hit, snap, hit, snap, hit. Okay? So there is Cunningham's what you do if they're a dog. Yes, I need one more, but I need to grab an extra piece of kit. You will have to forgive my bad colour coordination for my outfit, but as I said, it's raining, and this is about my only hat that's going to be any good for this in the rain. So, you might have a hat, and hats are great, because they look good. They're also potentially useful for a self-defense point of view. So if I was in my defensive stance, and dealing with somebody who's unarmed, I may decide to take the hat off, and keep it in this one. I can quite happily still do all of my blocks and everything with the hat in my hand. The hat is not going to hamper my hand moving attacks out the way. But what it does allow me to do is, if I get in closer, is to block out my opponent's view. Yeah? And if my opponent doesn't know where I am, it allows me to come in with different attacks. Yeah? So I have those kind of options. If I'm dealing with a situation where the other person is armed, I can still use this to move things out the way. It's a slight layer of protection to my hand, not a vast amount. But I can move it to hold it by the rim if it's a more solid hat, and actually use that with those same circular motions to move something offline. Because if I'm moving it offline with a hat, I can be striking them with the other hand. Okay? I still have the option as well of being able to push it forward to obscure their view, and then coming in with a strike they're not expecting. So, hats as well. Cunningham covers hats. Right, that was a very quick whistle-stop tour over the last hour of Cunningham cane. Okay, we've looked at the individual techniques, and we've looked at how Cunningham advises you use them against an unarmed opponent, against a grappling opponent, against an armed opponent, against a dog, if you're carrying an umbrella, and if you have a hat. Okay, that covers quite a lot of circumstances in an hour. Hopefully what you've seen is it's quite versatile and quite useful. The other thing it allows you to do is, because of this stance here, we're going to start with the offhand, the left hand off stance, sorry, for an unarmed person. The cane is here, okay? There's nothing to stop me turning that wrist over a little bit and leaning on it. Okay, it's not as great as if I had my hand on top for leaning, but if I've got the strength in my arm, I can quite happily make myself a tripod. Okay, and I can lean on that. And then I can deliver my parry and lean on it. I can deliver my strike, yeah, my backhand strike, my forehand strike, back to leaning on that cane. Parry, thrust. My parry, my rest position can be here. Yeah, I can still deal with all of my boxing and stuff here, up between the legs. That'll teach her. Yeah, block offline, hit. Back to leaning on it as a cane. So I can use this even if I actually need the cane. As long as I can stand for a couple of seconds unaided, I can be back to leaning on it again. It's not great, but it's better than trying to defend yourself and then just falling over. Now obviously again, I can do the same thing from the front stance. It's just all I have to do is, because otherwise I end up very linear if I have it forward, I'm just going to bring it a little bit out to the side. Okay? It's not quite as defensive, but I've still got that for when they come in. Keep hitting them. Wait for the opening. There it is. And I'm all the time coming back to resting on it to give myself a chance to catch my balance again. So it's not ideal, but it is there in Cunningham to use it if you actually need the cane to support yourself. Right, I'm aware I have gone over time once again, not a huge shock there. So I'll kind of finish up things there. So we've had a look at Cunningham today. Next week we'll be going on to have a look at another cane system, which is the Doyle style shillelagh. I mentioned it when we're here. We're going to be looking at this kind of weird kind of style here tomorrow, next week. We'll be looking at shillelagh, but also how we integrate shillelagh into something like Vignay, and you're going to start seeing all these kind of weird things that we're going to go on to look at a little bit later on. So that'll be next week. So that's what you've got to look forward to. And then for the rest of the month, we're going to be looking at different improvised weaponry. So hopefully that'll be stuff that'll be useful from a street defense point of view, but also useful for an interest point of view, because they tend to be a bit more interesting than in-depth theory on boxing guards, which is much easier to teach with other people and also sparring practice. So that's what we're going to be doing next week. As usual, if you've got any questions, drop them into the chat here. I'll pick them up there. Message me, phone me, whatever. I'm more than happy to talk through with any of the stuff, or if you have any questions. If you know more about Cunningham than me, or you know about other systems I don't, stick them in there and I'll look into it. I would love to know more. I'm always up for being educated as well. As I've said, Cunningham is not a specialty of mine. It's something I know a bit about, and it felt useful to share given the number of people that had asked me about it. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm looking forward, actually, now that I've done a bit more study on this again, to getting back to training, hopefully in a couple of months' time. I can try this out against people, see how it works. Kind of looking forward to that as a kind of bit of experimentation. So, with all that said, I think that kind of brings us towards the end of the class, and I'm only pretty much bang on time. How about that? So, we shall finish as we do by falling out. So, from an attention stance, and fall out. So, thank you very much. Hopefully you've enjoyed yourself. Hopefully I'll see you back here next week for session 12. Wow, 12 hours. That does seem to have been quite a long time. So yes, hopefully see you all here next week for that. And until then, look after yourself. It is a crazy and weird world out there. So, you know, use your own common sense. Keep yourself safe. And above all, in this time, we all need to be kind to each other because, as I've said, it's just horrible stuff happening at the minute. So stay safe, be kind, and I'll catch you next week.